The Supercars endurance season is underway after a fairly solid race at the historic Sandown Raceway. We had some highs, we had some lows, and we had some standout performances in there as well. I'm here to discuss all that and much more as part of my Round 9 review here on Fan at the Fence. Given the length of the races at this time of year, let's jump straight to the main events, the 161 laps on the Sunday, or almost 161 laps, and that race got underway with Erebus locking out the front row and both of their co-drivers getting a nice clean start. And I've got to say, actually, all the co-drivers really impressed me. I thought we were going to have way more dramas on that opening lap, but they did it very well. The early pace setter, however, was Jamie Whincup in his Red Bull, working his way to the front of the field, and that car would be seen there just about all day long. There was some clumsiness in the field with Zach Best colliding with Aaron Love on the exit of turn 1. Both of those guys managed to continue though. The big incident though in the opening stint of the race, and if not the entire race, was a wheel coming off Tander's Mustang. He was the co-driver for Davey Reynolds. That flung him into the wall at fairly high speed, ultimately landing in the gravel, causing our first safety car. There were more Ford casualties, however. That rogue wheel ended up taking out James Moffat, sharing with Cameron Waters in the Monster Machine. We'll talk more about that incident later on. And at the other end of the racetrack, Lee Holdsworth was in trouble as he cut across the grass at turn 2, doing significant damage to his rear diffuser and pretty much taking them out of the race. So there were some really desperate repairs early on in this event, and unfortunately it impacted pretty much the top 3 Ford runners as well. Upon the restart, we saw some really close and intense racing between the co-drivers. In fact, we had some very close calls to some major accidents down the back straight, but the guys got away with it. The same can't be said for Thomas Randa, or at least his car, which took damage following a clash with one of the Shell vehicles. But overall, as the co-drivers handed the cars back to the main drivers, I was pretty impressed. There were lots of solid stints up and down the field. Kevin Estre, who we'll talk about a bit later on, was really impressive. And I also thought Richie Stanaway did a very mature drive, working his way through the field, avoiding too much risk, but still making progress. Meanwhile, towards the front, Will Brown let Kostecki through to chase a good result. Back in the pit lane, everyone was watching to see if any teams would risk a non-compulsory brake change, with Matt Payne the only real lead runner to take the risk. And I thought that was going to be a huge factor in the end of the race, because in the dying laps, Cameron Hill crashed out at turn 9 after, I believe, a steering failure, bringing out the second safety car. On that final restart and the sprint to the finish though, Payne really didn't make much of an impression. I was really expecting him to make more progress. It was our usual Erebus vs Red Bull battle for the win in the end, with Brody Kostecki putting massive pressure on Brock Feeney for that win, having something of a half dive at turn 4, not pulling it off, and just didn't really seem to have the momentum from that point forward. Meanwhile, it was the reverse of pressure for third place. Brown was under huge attack from Shane Van Gisbergen, who had worked his way up with Richie Stenaway through the field throughout that race, and Brown made a big error, something of a double downshift, I think, going into turn 6, which led to a massive moment, and had there not been tarmac there, probably a huge crash as well. But that did give up the lead to, or the third place rather, to Shane Van Gisbergen. And that ultimately means that our podium was Brock Feeney and Jamie Whincup taking their first victory together as a combination, Brody Kostecki and David Russell in second for Erebus, and as I said, Richie Stenaway and Shane Van Gisbergen there in third. So how did all that stack up against my pre-round predictions? Well, let's just say I'm not going to be a fortune teller anytime soon, because my first prediction was that Waters and Moffat would take the win. That was crushed very early on with that rogue wheel. My second prediction was that Andre Heimgartner and Wood would be on the podium. That did not happen either. And my final prediction is that one of the co-drivers for Erebus or Red Bull would crash in the race, leading to a significant dent in the championship for their lead drivers. But the guys did a great job under big championship pressure, and I'm sure they'll be looking to continue that clean run headed to Bathurst in a few weeks. And with that, we'll move on to Clash Chat, where I normally talk about the most controversial on-track incident between drivers, but this week I just want to talk about the terrible luck that hit Garth Tander while doing a very solid job in the Penrite Mustang, losing a wheel off that car at a very high speed part of the track. He was very lucky that that accident wasn't bigger than it was. And then the even further misfortune was that that wheel ended up taking out James Moffat in the monster car and doing massive damage to the rear wing, taking it off altogether. And to collect a rogue wheel is unlucky in itself, but to collect it from a vertical shot down at your car is just even worse. It is so unlucky when you consider the speed these things move and how much ground they cover so quickly. And yeah, it was just really unfortunate that it was two of the leading Ford cars, with Davey Reynolds and Gartender looking like a really great combination, as a lot of us expected, and James Moffat and Cameron Waters unable to show what they had up their sleeve as well. I really wanted to see how these guys went. I was very deflated, even as a GM fan, when I saw how this all unfolded. Looking at the weekend at a very high level though, let's talk about the key positives, starting of course with the fact the Sandown 500 exists again. That is a good thing in itself. That's a victory, a big box checked already, and it was a really good weekend. It was great to have the format back around this particular track. In terms of other wins, it was really good to see Greg Murphy back in the commentary team, especially with all the excitement about Supercars going back to New Zealand next year. As I mentioned earlier, I was really impressed with the clean start from most of the co-drivers. There was a few incidents here and there, but by and large, there weren't too many horrendous driving standards that took key competitors out early on. The teams, I think, also did a great job managing the pit stops. There were huge question marks around the risk of fire, drivers struggling to get in and out of the cars, and the driver changes, but all of it seemed to go pretty smoothly. Although that said, a lot of teams took the option not to change their brakes, and they're not going to have that freedom at Bathurst. They are going to have to bite the bullet and take the risk. So we'll see how that goes when they get to the mountain. And overall, it was a pressure race from start to finish there. I was hoping for a bit more happening in the middle in terms of incidents or excitement or wheel-to-wheel racing, but we did have a very good strong start and a very strong finish as well. Partly helped by a safety car, but it led to some excitement regardless. As for my weekend woes, I was really frustrated that time certainty was a factor at such a large and important race. Obviously, it was unlucky that Super 2 had a major accident that led to some barrier repairs, postponing the main event, but I feel like there should be a lot more scheduling allowance for these events, whether that's getting the maximum time in the evening they can run to extended, or taking out a support category in the morning and starting things a little bit earlier, because I feel like Supercars were quite lucky here. It felt like the race had kind of settled down and that everyone was kind of where their pace was. You know, Feeney looked like he was the fastest right at the end. Kostecki didn't seem to have much left. So it didn't feel like we were robbed of a result necessarily, but I feel like Supercars were lucky because that was a very clean race for the distance, almost 500 Ks. And had we had more safety cars, we could have lost a lot more laps. So got away with that one, but yeah, still frustrating to see time certainty be a factor. And then my second frustration is one I know a lot of you guys have concerns with as well. I've seen it in the comments, I feel it as well as a fan, and that's the Gen 3 product, its reliability and the ongoing discussion about parity. On the reliability front, it was really deflating to see wheels coming off the cars again. That was an early season issue that I thought had been resolved, and now it's reappeared as well. And that's really concerning heading to Bathurst, considering the speeds there, considering how dense the crowd is, and the fact there aren't all that high catch fencing around some parts of that circuit. So that's a big concern. I really hope there's some sort of update to make sure those wheels are going to stay on the cars when they get to the mountain. As for parity, I've actually recorded this segment more times than I can count now because I keep going down rabbit holes with it, but long story short, I think I'm just disappointed that parity is still such a hot topic in the paddock at this point of the season. After the bend, it looked like things were starting to head in the right direction, but at Sandown, it seemed to have blown wide open again with lots of discussion in the media between the teams and of course the fans as well. So that's a shame because that's putting a bit of a shadow in the lead up to Bathurst, and it sounds like there could be wholesale changes coming to the cars in terms of center of gravity, engines and aerodynamics, all potentially on the cards. So we'll see how all that unfolds. Alrighty, let's pick things up and do some awards. The surprise of the weekend for me was absolutely Kevin Estre. I was so impressed with the way he's just adapted himself to Supercars. It was mentioned going into Gen 3 that they're a lot more like the GT4 cars, so there's a bit of an easier learning curve there for our drivers entering the championship, but even then he did such a good job acclimatizing ties into the series, and I'm really excited to see what he does at Bathurst. My V7 award, who dropped the cylinder, I've got to give this one to Mark Skye for his absolute horror movie scream on lap 43 when Lowndes was nearly tangled up in a big accident with one of the BJR cars. That scream just came out of nowhere and it just made me laugh so hard watching the broadcast. Who gave it the jandal? There's a guy giving it the jandal on a motorbike, if you can hear that in the background. But I'm going to give this one to Ryle Harris, who caught an absolutely incredible tank slapper going through turn 6 in the V8 Super Ute series. Go and check that out if you haven't seen it already. I'll leave a link to the race highlights of that one down in the description. And the special shout out, there was a lot to choose from this weekend, but I'm going to give it to Todd Hazelwood and Blanchard Racing Team. Those guys had a really strong performance in quali and the top 10 shootout, and they haven't had one of those for a very long time now. The race didn't go their way, but it was a glimmer of hope that I feel that team and its fans really needed. So fingers crossed they also continue that good performance in Bathurst. As for my overall weekend rating, I'm going to give this one 3 out of 5 stars. If I could go 3.5 and do half points, I would, but we're going to settle and round it off at 3. It was a solid weekend overall. I had a really good start to that race. It was a pressure finish as well, helped by the safety car. The midpoint didn't quite offer the unpredictability I like to see in the Enduros, but overall still a great race. But I've also ducked a star just because of all the issues that emerged this weekend with Gentry reliability and the parity discussion. For me, Sandown is all about getting you excited for Bathurst, but I'm leaving Sandown a little bit concerned about some of those background issues. So that's why I've also taken a star off. As for you guys though, as always, that was just my personal opinion. I completely respect anyone that feels differently. We've got 52 people voting their thoughts. We had 15% go for 5 stars. The majority of people, 60% going for 4 stars. 19% down at the 3-star mark, and then some people going for the 1s and 2s as well. So overall, people seem pretty positive, but it sounds like there's some concerns out there as well in the community. As always, I like to finish up with some thoughts from you guys. The first one here from Brody Taylor saying, not a bad race, seen worse 500s, but seen better ones too. And I don't really have much to expand on this one. I just feel like it was a really fair assessment, or at least it aligns closely with how I felt after this round of racing. Second one here from Curry Pie saying, good race. A lot of co-driver mistakes though. To be honest with you, the co-driver mistakes, lots of them were reasonably minor. A few bigger incidents here and there in terms of cars spinning around, but I thought the guys did pretty well, as I mentioned earlier. And truth be told, I actually really enjoyed the co-driver stint of the race. There was nothing overly egregious in terms of behavior, but it still felt quite scrappy, and there were some really good battles going on up and down the field. And then finally, one here from CK talking about Kevin Ashtrate doing a great job, as I also mentioned, but he said he would love to see more international co-drivers of his caliber in the Enduros, and I've got to agree on that. It feels like, obviously, when COVID hit, we had a lot of issues with international drivers, but it's starting to creep back now. And it's great that we're seeing people like Simona Di Silvestro come back for Bathurst, but also new talents of supercars like Kevin Ashtrate as well. So fingers crossed that trend continues, because I think NASCAR has proven with the international talent that they're brought over that it can bring a lot of eyeballs as well from overseas. So yeah, fully agree on this one and hope to see more internationals come over in the future. Alright, in championship land, despite this one being an enduro with loads of risk attached, the championship is largely unchanged. We've got Brody Kostecki sort of edging away at his lead there at the front. Shane van Gisbergen still not too far behind in second. Brock Feeney in third, being very consistent, and Will Brown there in fourth, trying to recover from that difficult weekend at the Bend, and Sandown was a solid step towards that. On the team's front, Erebus still lead the way, followed by Red Bull, who have closed that gap. Brad Jones racing in third, Shell V-Power racing in fourth. They've made some good progress recently. Tickford in fifth, Walkinshaw and Andretti United, who had a tough weekend, in sixth. Team 18 in 7th, Newlon in 8th, Penwright in 9th, and Truck Assist in 10th. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of the review. Of course, it's the big one up next. I've mentioned that there's a few question marks and shadows hovering around the championship, but nevertheless, Bathurst is Bathurst. That place always delivers something exciting, so I am really keen for that event. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to see my Bathurst preview, and if I get the time I hope to do some special content, some different stuff leading up to that race as well, so keep your eyes peeled for that. In the meantime, remember that all the thoughts I've shared here are just my personal opinion. If you feel differently about anything, I completely respect that. You're welcome to leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Do remember to treat people like a trackside though while you're down there. In the meantime, thank you for your support, and I will see you in another video very, very soon.